The email notification lit up my phone at 2:47 a.m. Subject line: urgent claim review required. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding not from the late hour, but from the name that appeared on my screen: Richard Morrison. My father, the man who had signed my death warrant 3 years ago, was now begging for mercy from the very system he had manipulated. And his case had landed on my desk. The same desk I had fought for, climbed for, suffered for. I stared at those two words, his name, and felt absolutely nothing. No rage, no sadness, just the cold, calculated satisfaction of knowing that the wheel had finally turned full circle. If you've ever been thrown away by the people who were supposed to love you most, if you've ever rebuilt yourself from ashes they left behind, stay with me. This is that story. And before we go further, if this resonates with you, hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of survival and justice, and drop a comment telling me, have you ever had to become your own hero? Because that's exactly what I had to do. Now let me take you back to where it all began, to the night I died and was reborn. 3 years earlier, I was Harper Morrison, 26 years old and the family ghost. I existed in the spaces between their real lives, the margins of their perfectly curated story. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Morrison, lived in a sprawling colonial in Westchester, the kind of house that screamed old money, even though Richard had only made his fortune in the last 15 years through commercial real estate development. My mother Eleanor had given up her career as a marketing executive when Blair was born, dedicating herself entirely to transforming our family into something she called brand building, but what I recognized as an exhausting performance of status. Blair, my older sister by 3 years, was the golden child in every possible way. Tall, blonde, genetically blessed with the kind of symmetrical features that photographed like a dream. She had been modeling since she was 16, and by 29, she was on the cusp of what my mother breathlessly called the big break, a contract with a major fashion house. The kind that could elevate her from Instagram influencer, doing local campaigns, to actual international recognition. I was supposed to be the supportive one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need anything, because I had learned early that needing things from my parents came with a price I couldn't afford to pay. My childhood had been a series of comparisons where I always came up short. Blair got ballet lessons and acting coaches. I got told that sports would make me too muscular and theater was a waste of time when I wasn't naturally charismatic. Blair got a new car for her 16th birthday. I got permission to use my mother's old sedan if I paid for my own insurance and gas. By the time I was 18, I had stopped expecting equity. I worked my way through community college while living at home, paid my own tuition, bought my own clothes. When I got pregnant at 22 by a boyfriend who disappeared the moment I told him, my parents' disappointment was palpable and permanent. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table and explained, in the careful tone you'd use with someone not very bright, that I had made my choices and now I would have to live with the consequences without dragging down the family. The consequence was Mason, and he was the only purely good thing that had ever happened to me. My son had his father's dark curls and my grandmother's green eyes, and from the moment he was born, he loved me with the kind of uncomplicated devotion I had never experienced from anyone else. My parents tolerated him, mostly by ignoring him. Blair called him cute in the distracted way. You'd comment on a stranger's puppy. I stayed in their house because I couldn't afford not to. I worked 2 jobs, retail during the day and waitressing 3 nights a week, saving every penny I could while paying my parents $300 a month for what my father called rent, but what felt more like a fine for the inconvenience of my existence. Mason stayed at a daycare near my retail job, and the coordination required to make it all work was like a second job in itself. I became very good at being useful. I picked Blair up from casting calls when she didn't want to take a cab. I ran errands for my mother when she was too busy managing Blair's career. I watched my father's investment portfolio and gave him tips I'd researched because he'd mentioned once that he appreciated another perspective, and any scrap of his approval felt like winning the lottery. I made myself indispensable in small ways, hoping that somehow it would add up to being valued. The winter Mason turned 4 was when everything unraveled, though I didn't recognize the early warning signs. Blair had landed what my mother kept calling the opportunity of a lifetime, a campaign with a European fashion house that would be shot in New York but would run internationally. The shoot was scheduled for a Tuesday in February, and the weeks leading up to it were chaos. Our house became command central for Blair's career. My mother had spreadsheets tracking everything from Blair's diet to her sleep schedule to the weather forecast. My father had multiple meetings with the contract lawyers, negotiating terms and fees. I started feeling sick around that time. At first, I thought it was exhaustion. I was working nearly 60 hours a week between my two jobs, plus taking care of Mason, plus running endless errands for the family. The tightness in my chest came and went. Sometimes I'd be walking up the stairs and have to stop, gripping the railing until the feeling passed. At work, I'd occasionally get dizzy and have to sit down in the stockroom for a few minutes. My mother noticed only because I had to decline driving Blair to a dress fitting one evening. I told her I wasn't feeling well, and she looked at me with something between suspicion and irritation. "You're not pregnant again, are you?" she asked. When I said no, that it was probably just a cold, she told me to take some vitamin C and stop being dramatic. We all feel tired, Harper. That's life. Some of us just push through it. I pushed through it. I took 3 times the recommended dose of over-the-counter pain medication for the chest tightness. I drank coffee until my hands shook. I told myself it was stress, that it would pass after Blair's shoot when things calmed down. But things didn't calm down. They accelerated. 2 weeks before the shoot, the fashion house requested additional test shots. My mother went into what I privately thought of as her general mode, barking orders and creating schedules and treating our home like a war room. Blair was on a strict diet, a workout regimen, a skincare routine that involved products that cost more than my monthly salary. She was stressed, which meant she was demanding, which meant I was running to the organic market at 10 p.m. for the specific brand of green juice she wanted or driving across the county to pick up supplements from some wellness influencer's private stock. The night of February 8th started earlier than most. My mother woke me at 6 a.m. by knocking sharply on my door. "Blair needs to be at the dermatologist by 7:30. You're driving her." I had worked until midnight, the night before, and had exactly 5.5 hours of sleep. Mason was still asleep. I pulled on clothes, drank coffee standing up, and drove my sister across town while she FaceTimed with her agent and complained about how puffy she looked. After I dropped her off, I went to my retail job, worked an 8-hour shift helping entitled customers find the perfect shade of paint, picked Mason up from daycare, came home, made dinner that no one but Mason and I ate, cleaned up, gave Mason a bath, read him stories, put him to bed, and then dealt with a crisis, where Blair needed her dress for the shoot altered immediately because the original alteration place had done it wrong. I drove the dress across the city to a tailor my mother had found who would do a rush job. Waited 2 hours in my car in their parking lot, drove the dress back, hung it carefully in Blair's closet, and finally collapsed into my own bed at midnight. I woke 3 hours later because I couldn't breathe. Not in the exaggerated way you say it when you're overwhelmed, but literally could not get enough air into my lungs. It felt like someone had wrapped steel bands around my chest and was tightening them slowly, methodically. I sat up, gasping, trying to remember the breathing exercises I'd learned from a YouTube video about anxiety. But this wasn't anxiety. This was my body failing. I got out of bed, moving slowly, because any quick movement made the pain worse. I made it down the hallway, holding the wall for support. The house was dark except for the light under Blair's door. She was probably doing meditation or visualization or whatever her wellness coach had recommended for the night before a big shoot. I continued past her room to my parents' door and knocked softly. Nothing. I knocked again. Harder. My father's irritated voice came through the door. Would I manage to say that I needed help? That something was wrong? I heard him sigh. Heard movement. And then he opened the door wearing the expensive pajamas my mother had bought him for Christmas. He looked at me standing there in my t-shirt and sweatpants, probably pale and sweaty, and his expression was not concern. It was annoyance. "What's wrong?" he repeated. This time like he was talking to an employee who had interrupted an important meeting. "I can't breathe right. Something's wrong with my chest. I think I need to go to the hospital." He checked his watch. It was 3:15 a.m. "Harper, it's the middle of the night. Blair's shoot is in less than 6 hours. Your mother and I need to sleep. Dad, please." I really think something's wrong. He studied me for a moment, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. This was Richard Morrison, the man who had built a commercial real estate empire by being able to quickly assess costs versus benefits. I watched him assess me and find me not worth the investment. Take some Advil. Drink water. If you're still feeling bad in the morning, you can call your doctor. In the morning, might be too late. I said, and my voice cracked. Please. My mother appeared behind him, her sleeping mask pushed up on her forehead. What's going on, Harper? Why are you making so much noise? I tried to explain again, but my mother cut me off. You look fine. You're probably having a panic attack or something. You know how you get when you're stressed. She said this as if I had a documented history of hypochondria, as if I regularly woke them up for imaginary emergencies. I had never done this before. Not once. I really think I need a doctor. I said, get her now. Because speaking hurt, and because I was starting to understand that I was not going to get help from these people. Do you have any idea what an ER visit costs? My father said. Even with insurance. We're looking at thousands in potential bills. And for what? For you to be told you have anxiety and need to relax. Richard. She does look pale, my mother conceded. But there was no kindness in her observation. She was stating a fact, not expressing concern. Blair's shoot is tomorrow. We can't have any distractions. We definitely can't have any financial surprises right now. Not when we've invested so much in this opportunity. I must have swayed because suddenly my father grabbed my arm. Not gently. He steered me back toward my room. Go back to bed. Get some sleep. You'll feel better in the morning. But I didn't go back to my room. The moment he closed their door, I went to the kitchen and called 911. I whispered my address and said I couldn't breathe. The dispatcher asked me questions I could barely answer. She stayed on the line with me, telling me help was coming. Just hold on. The sound of sirens woke the house. I was sitting on the kitchen floor, leaning against the cabinet, phone still in my hand. When the paramedics came in, my father appeared in the doorway in his bathrobe, his face purple with rage. Who called 911? I did. I managed to say. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you know what the neighbors are going to think? One of the paramedics, a woman probably in her 40s, looked up from where she was checking my vitals. Sir, your daughter's oxygen saturation is at 87%. Normal is 95 to 100. She needs to go to the hospital immediately. We can drive her, my father said. I don't think you understand the severity, the paramedic said, her voice getting harder. This is critical. We need to transport her now. My mother had appeared, with Blair behind her. Blair looked at the scene, at the paramedics and the equipment and me on the floor, and said, Is this really necessary tonight? I have the biggest day of my career tomorrow. I watched the paramedic's face change as she processed this. I saw her look at my sister, beautiful and cold in her silk pajamas, and then back at me, struggling to breathe on the kitchen floor. I saw her face harden with recognition of what kind of family this was. Ma'am, she said to my mother, your daughter may be experiencing respiratory failure. We're taking her to Mercy General. You should probably come with us. We have commitments in the morning, my mother said. We'll follow in our own car. They loaded me into the ambulance. As the doors closed, I heard my father on the phone, probably with his lawyer, probably about the bill, probably calculating whether they could somehow make this my fault. The last thing I saw before the morphine they gave me for pain started to blur everything was Blair standing in the driveway in her pajamas, looking at the ambulance like it was an inconvenience, like I was a problem that should have been solved more quietly. At the hospital, they ran tests, X-rays, CT scans, blood work. The ER doctor, a young man who looked exhausted but kind, explained that I had severe pneumonia that had progressed to the point of causing acute respiratory distress. My lungs were compromised. I needed to be admitted, probably to the ICU for monitoring. How long have you been sick? He asked. A few weeks. I admitted. Maybe a month. I thought it was just stress. He shook his head. This didn't happen in a few weeks. This has been building for a while. You should have come in earlier. I tried, I said, and my voice broke. Tonight I tried. He squeezed my hand. You're here now. We're going to take care of you. They moved me to the ICU around dawn. I was alone in the room, hooked up to machines that beeped and monitored and breathed for me when my own lungs couldn't quite manage. Through the window, I watched the sky turn from black to gray to pale pink. Somewhere in the city, my sister was probably doing her pre-shoot yoga. Somewhere, my mother was coordinating with the glam team. Somewhere, my father was reviewing contracts. And I was here, tethered to machines. Alone. A nurse came in to check my vitals. He introduced himself as Owen, told me he'd be taking care of me during the day shift. He was maybe 30, with kind eyes and an easy manner that made me want to cry because kindness was so foreign to me now that it felt like a luxury I didn't deserve. Your family hasn't arrived yet, he asked, checking the monitors. They have something important this morning, I said. He paused, looked at me, and I saw understanding in his face. You're important, he said quietly. I need you to know that. What's happening to your lungs right now? This is serious. You're not overreacting. You're not being dramatic. You almost died. I started crying then. Silently, tears running down my face into the oxygen mask. Owen pulled up a chair and sat with me, this stranger who was treating me with more care than my own family. And he talked to me about nothing important. Just filling the space so I wouldn't feel so alone. My parents arrived around 11 a.m. I heard them before I saw them. My mother's voice in the hallway talking to someone about directions to a restaurant where they were meeting Blair for lunch after the shoot. They walked into my room like they were attending an obligation. A graduation or a piano recital? They'd rather skip. My father went directly to the nurse's station. I could hear him through the door, his voice carrying that tone of authority he used when he wanted something. What's the situation with my daughter? When can she be discharged? Owen's response was measured and professional. Mr. Morrison, your daughter is critically ill. She's on oxygen support. She needs to stay here for observation. We're monitoring for potential complications. Complications that are covered by insurance. There was a pause. Sir, I'm concerned with your daughter's health, not her insurance coverage. My mother sat down in the chair next to my bed. She didn't touch me, didn't ask how I was feeling. She checked her phone, scrolled through what I assumed were photos from Blair's shoot. The lighting is gorgeous, she murmured, almost to herself. Mom, I said through the oxygen mask. My voice muffled. I was really scared. She looked up, seemed surprised I had spoken. Well, you're fine now. The doctors have you all sorted out. She went back to her phone. Blair looks absolutely stunning in these shots. This is exactly what we'd hoped for. My father came back in then, his jaw tight. They're saying you need to stay for potentially 3 to 5 days. Do you understand how much this is going to cost? The ICU is thousands of dollars per day, even with insurance. I'm sorry, I heard myself say, even though I had nothing to apologize for. Sorry doesn't pay the bills. Harper, we've invested heavily in Blair's career. This shoot cost us money in preparation. Money we allocated carefully. We can't afford surprise medical emergencies right now. Owen appeared in the doorway. Mr. Morrison, I need to check your daughter's vitals. My father stepped aside, still talking. There must be a less expensive option. Can't she be monitored at home? We're responsible people. We can follow medical instructions. Owen finished his examination and turned to my parents, his expression carefully neutral. Your daughter needs hospital care. Her condition is unstable. If she leaves now, it could be life-threatening. Everything could be life-threatening. If you listen to doctors long enough, my mother said, laughing a little, like she'd made a clever joke. They always exaggerate for liability reasons. Ma'am, I'm not exaggerating. Your daughter's lungs are working at reduced capacity. She needs supplemental oxygen. She needs monitoring. She needs to be here. My father pulled out his phone. I'm calling our lawyer. There must be something we can do about this. They stayed for maybe 20 minutes total, most of which they spent on their phones or having whispered arguments by the door about costs and coverage and whether they could challenge the necessity of ICU care. When they left, my mother patted my hand like she was acknowledging a pet. We'll check in later. Try to get some rest. And Harper, really? Try not to worry so much. Stress is probably what caused this in the first place. After they left, Owen came back in. He sat in the chair my mother had vacated. I need to tell you something, he said. And I'm breaking protocol by doing this. But I think you need to know. Your father is out there right now trying to get you transferred out of ICU or discharged entirely. He's citing financial concerns. He's trying to invoke something called economic hardship exemption. What does that mean? I asked. Though I thought I knew. It means he's trying to argue that the family can't afford your care. So the hospital should either absorb the cost or release you, but your parents don't qualify for any hardship program. I've seen their insurance information. They have excellent coverage. They're not going to be financially destroyed by this. They just don't want to pay anything. I closed my eyes. What happens if he succeeds? Normally nothing. We don't discharge critical patients because their families complain about costs, but your father is very persuasive. And he's invoking all kinds of regulations and threatening legal action. He's claiming you're stable enough for home care with outpatient follow-up. Owen paused. Are you stable enough, medically? Borderline. But it's risky. You need to be monitored. You need oxygen. You need somewhere safe to recover. What should I do? That's not for me to say. But I will tell you this. I've been a nurse for 8 years. I've seen a lot of families under stress. But I've never seen a family more concerned about the bill than about the patient. He wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. That's my personal cell number. If anything happens, if you need help, call me. Even if it's not during my shift, even if it's the middle of the night, promise me. He promised. That evening, around 7 p.m., my parents came back with Blair. The shoot had apparently been a massive success. My mother was practically vibrating with excitement, showing me pictures on her iPad while I lay there struggling to breathe through the oxygen mask. Blair looked radiant in the photos, ethereal and perfect. Every bit, the international model. This is going to change everything, my mother said. The fashion house is already talking about booking Blair for their spring campaign. Do you understand what this means? This could be the beginning of something huge. My father was talking to someone at the nurse's station again. I could hear the tone of his voice. Reasonable and firm. The voice of someone used to getting what they want. When he came back into the room, he had paperwork in his hand. Good news, he said. We've worked it out. You're going to be discharged tonight. Owen, who had stayed late specifically to be there for me, stepped forward. I strongly advise against that. Harper needs at least 48 more hours of monitored care. We've spoken to the hospital administrator, my father said. They agree that with proper home care instructions, Harper can be safely discharged. We're taking full responsibility. Taking full responsibility doesn't change the medical reality, Owen said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. Are you questioning my ability to care for my own daughter? My father said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. I'm questioning whether you understand the risk. I understand that we're her family, and we make the decisions. Now, where do I sign? I watched Owen's face as my father signed the discharge papers. Papers that released the hospital from liability. Papers that put my life in my parents' hands. Owen looked at me and I looked at him, and we both knew what was happening. I was being checked out like a library book, returned before the fine could accumulate. They got me dressed in the clothes I'd been wearing when the ambulance picked me up. They disconnected the monitors and the oxygen. A nurse brought a wheelchair, because apparently I couldn't walk on my own. Owen walked beside the wheelchair all the way to the parking lot, carrying the printed home care instructions that I knew my parents would never read. At the car, he pulled me aside. You have my number, he said quietly. Use it if you need to. Please. The drive home was silent except for my mother and Blair discussing the shoot. They analyzed every photo, every angle, every piece of feedback from the fashion house team. I sat in the back seat, breathing shallowly because deep breaths hurt, and realized that I was a problem that had been temporarily solved. They had gotten me out of the expensive hospital. Now I just needed to have the courtesy to get better quickly and quietly. At home, they helped me to the couch in the living room, gave me a blanket and a bottle of water, and then immediately returned to the dining room table where they had spread out all the photos from Blair's shoot. They were comparing them, making notes about which ones Blair should post on Instagram. planning the rollout strategy. Mason had been staying with a neighbor, my only friend in the area, a woman named Grace, who ran a home daycare, and who had understood without judgment when I'd called her at 3 a.m. to say I was going to the hospital. She brought him home around 8 p.m., and he climbed onto the couch next to me, careful and gentle in the way kids are when they sense something is wrong. "Mommy's sick," he asked. "A little bit, baby. But I'm getting better." He cuddled against me, his small body warm and solid, and I held him as carefully as I could because every movement hurt. From the dining room, I could hear my family celebrating, popping champagne, toasting to Blair's success. No one came to check on me. No one asked if I needed anything. Around 11 p.m., everyone went to bed. My mother gave me instructions to take the pain medication the hospital had prescribed if I needed it, and reminded me that there was leftovers in the fridge if I got hungry. Then she went upstairs with Blair, their voices drifting back, still discussing the shoot, the photos, the future. I lay on that couch in the dark, listening to Mason's breathing as he slept, curled against me, and I felt something inside me break. Not dramatically, not violently, just a quiet snapping of the last thread that had been holding my hope together. The hope that somehow, if I was useful enough, if I asked for little enough, if I made myself small enough, they would eventually see my value. The hope that family meant something, that blood meant something, that somewhere underneath all the calculations and priorities, they loved me. That thread broke, and I felt the weight of it fall away. And with it, the person I had been trying so hard to be. Around 2 a.m., the pain got worse. The tightness in my chest was back, the feeling of drowning on dry land. I couldn't get enough air. I tried to stay calm, tried to breathe through it. But my body was failing. I carefully moved Mason to the other end of the couch, making sure he stayed asleep, and I pulled out my phone. I could have called out to my parents. Their room was directly above the living room, but I remembered my father's face when he signed those discharge papers. My mother's voice talking about the cost. Blair's irritation at the inconvenience. I knew what would happen if I woke them again. More annoyance. More lectures about being dramatic. More calculations about cost versus benefit. Instead, I called Owen. He answered on the second ring. Alert despite the hour. "Harper, what's wrong? I can't breathe." I whispered. "It's bad again. I think I need help. I'm calling 911 for you right now. Stay on the line with me. They'll be so angry," I said. And I was crying now, partly from fear and partly from the crushing understanding of how completely alone I was. "Let them be angry. You matter more than their feelings. I'm staying on the phone with you until the ambulance gets there." The sirens woke the house again. This time, when my father appeared at the top of the stairs. His face was beyond rage. It was cold, calculating fury. "What the hell have you done?" I couldn't breathe. I said, "I had to call. Twice in one day. Do you understand what this looks like? Do you understand what you're doing to this family?" The paramedics came in. Different ones this time, but with the same urgency. They started checking my vitals, asking questions. My oxygen saturation had dropped to 84%. They needed to transport immediately. As they loaded me onto the gurney, my mother appeared in her robe, her face tight with anger. "This is absolutely unacceptable. Harper, calling ambulances in the middle of the night like we're some kind of trashy family having a crisis. What will the neighbors think?" "Mom!" "I can't breathe," I said, and my voice was barely a whisper now. "You were fine earlier. You're doing this for attention. You're upset because Blair had a successful day and you can't stand not being the center of everything." One of the paramedics, an older man with a gray beard, looked at my mother with undisguised disgust. "Ma'am, your daughter is in respiratory distress. This is not a behavioral issue. This is a medical emergency. We already paid thousands today for her hospital stay. We can't afford to keep doing this." "Then I guess you'll have to figure out what's more expensive," he said. "Another hospital bill or a funeral?" The silence that followed was absolute. I saw my mother's face go white, saw my father's jaw clench, but neither of them argued further. They stood in the doorway as the paramedics took me out, and the last thing I heard was Blair's voice from upstairs. asking if they could please keep it down because she had another important meeting in the morning. This time, Owen had called ahead to a different hospital, one where he had friends, where he knew the culture was different. Mercy General had been convenient but bureaucratic. St. Catherine's, where the ambulance took me, was smaller, escrapier, and according to Owen, had doctors and nurses who actually gave a damn. The ER doctor who treated me was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Patel, and she didn't mince words. "You're in acute respiratory failure. If you had waited another hour, we'd be having a very different conversation. Whoever discharged you from Mercy was negligent, and whoever convinced them to discharge you should be ashamed of themselves." She admitted me immediately, not to a regular room, but to the ICU, and she put notes in my chart that I couldn't be discharged without her personal approval. When my father called the hospital demanding information, she refused to speak to him. When he showed up in person, she had hospital security escort him out. "Your job is to get better," she told me. "My job is to make sure you can do that without interference. You're safe here." I stayed at St. Catherine's for 6 days. Owen came to visit on his days off, bringing books and decent coffee and conversation that had nothing to do with obligations or costs. Dr. Patel checked on me twice a day, monitoring my progress with satisfaction, treating my recovery like a personal victory. The nurses learned that I had a 4-year-old son and made sure I could FaceTime with him every evening. My family visited once, on day 3, in a group that felt more like an inspection than a comfort call. They stayed for exactly 15 minutes. Blair complained about the parking. My mother asked when I thought I'd be released. My father mentioned that they'd gotten the first bill from Mercy General and wanted to discuss payment plans. No one asked how I was feeling. No one brought Mason to see me, even though I'd asked repeatedly. When they left, Dr. Patel came into my room and sat in the visitor chair. "Harper, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. When you leave here, do you have somewhere safe to go? Somewhere that's not back to that house?" I started to automatically say yes, then stopped. Did I? My friend Grace had already gone above and beyond watching Mason. I had no extended family, no close friends with spare rooms. I had been so focused on surviving day to day that I had never built a life outside my family's orbit. "I don't know," I admitted. "Then let's figure it out," she said. "Because you're not going back there. Not if I have anything to say about it." Over the next 3 days, Dr. Patel and Owen became my unlikely guardian angels. Dr. Patel connected me with a hospital social worker who helped me apply for emergency assistance programs. Owen helped me search for apartments I could actually afford, reaching out to his own network to find landlords willing to work with someone whose credit wasn't great and whose rental history was non-existent. Between the two of them, they created a safety net I didn't know existed. I found a small studio apartment in a neighborhood that wasn't great but wasn't terrible, 45 minutes from my parents' house. The rent was $850 a month, which was almost exactly what I'd been earning from one of my jobs. The landlord, a woman named Mrs. Chen, who owned the building, agreed to a month-to-month lease when Owen personally vouched for me. On the day I was discharged, Grace brought Mason to the hospital. I held my son and told him we were going on an adventure, that we were going to have our own place, just the two of us. He was 4 years old and resilient in the way children are, excited about the change instead of scared. I called my parents and told them I wasn't coming back. My mother's response was immediate and cold. "You're abandoning your family when we've invested so much in helping you. After everything we've done?" "Everything you've done," I repeated. And something in my voice must have shocked her because she went silent. "You signed me out of the ICU against medical advice so you wouldn't have to pay the bill. You cared more about Blair's photo shoot than whether I lived or died. That's what you've done. We were trying to help you understand the value of money, the importance of not being wasteful with healthcare resources." My father interjected. He must have picked up the other line. "I was dying," I said. "And you were worried about your investment in Blair's career." "Don't be so dramatic," my mother said. "You weren't dying. You had pneumonia. I had pneumonia that progressed to respiratory failure because I waited too long to get help because I'd learned from you that asking for things was an inconvenience." There was a long pause. Then my father spoke, his voice hard. If you leave, don't expect any help from us, financial or otherwise. You'll be on your own. I've been on my own since the day I was born. I said, I'm just finally accepting it. I hung up before they could respond. I blocked their numbers. I packed the few belongings I had at their house into garbage bags, picked up Mason, and drove to our new apartment. It was empty except for a mattress on the floor that Grace had donated and some kitchen supplies Owen had dropped off. It was the smallest space I'd ever lived in. It was mine. The first month was brutal. I was still recovering physically, still rebuilding my strength. I could only work part-time hours. Money was beyond tight. There were nights when I ate crackers for dinner so Mason could have something more substantial. There were times when I cried in the bathroom after Mason went to sleep, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of trying to survive. But something else happened too. In the silence of that small apartment, without the constant pressure of my family's judgment and demands, I started to hear my own thoughts. I started to understand that the story I'd been telling myself, that I was the problem, that I needed to try harder, that I needed to earn love, was a lie they had fed me, and I had swallowed. I started researching during Mason's nap time, and after his bedtime, I looked up health insurance policies, trying to understand the system that had almost killed me. I found articles about medical billing, about how hospitals negotiated with insurance companies, about the appeals process, about the loopholes people used to get coverage for things that should have been denied, or to deny coverage for things that should have been approved. I learned that my father's business partner sat on the board of Mercy General. I discovered that my mother's college roommate worked in the claims department of their insurance company. I pieced together the network of connections they had used for years to manipulate their health care, to get preferential treatment, to fast-track approvals, to contest bills. The more I learned, the angrier I became. But it wasn't the hot, explosive anger I'd felt at first. It was cold, focused anger, the kind that sharpens you instead of breaking you. I started taking online courses in medical billing and coding. I studied healthcare administration. I learned the language of insurance policies, the codes, the procedures, the appeals process. 3 months after leaving, I got a new job at a medical billing company. It paid better than retail and had normal hours. I was good at it. Eerily good. I could spot errors that others missed. I understood the patterns, the ways things were supposed to work, versus the ways they actually worked. 6 months after that, a coworker mentioned that her friend worked at Meridian Health Insurance, and they were hiring. It was entry-level, just data processing, but it was a foot in the door. I applied. I studied for the interview like I was preparing for the bar exam. I got the job. From my first day at Meridian, I was focused. I wasn't just looking for a career. I was looking for power. The power to do what needed to be done. I watched how the company worked, how claims moved through the system, how decisions were made. I identified the bottlenecks, the inefficiencies, the places where human judgment could influence outcomes. I made myself useful. I stayed late. I volunteered for projects no one else wanted. I learned every system, every process. I made suggestions that saved the company money or time. I built a reputation for being thorough, detail-oriented, someone who never cut corners. My supervisor Deborah noticed. She was a woman in her late 40s who had worked in insurance for 20 years and who appreciated competence. She started giving me more complex cases, teaching me how to read between the lines of medical reports, how to spot inconsistencies, how to apply policies fairly but firmly. You have good instincts, she told me after I'd been there about 9 months. Most people in this job just follow the checklist. You actually think about what you're doing. I was promoted to claims specialist after a year. The job gave me access to more files, more complex cases. I started to see patterns in how high-level claims were processed, how certain names seemed to move faster through the system, how some policies got more scrutiny while others sailed through. I learned that this was just how things worked. People with connections, people who knew how to work the system, people who could afford to make noise, they got better treatment. And people like me, people without power, we got whatever was left over. I kept studying, kept taking courses. I got certified in advanced medical coding. I completed a healthcare administration program. I attended every training session Meridian offered. I became the person who knew more about the policies than almost anyone except the people who wrote them. 18 months in, I was promoted again, this time to senior claims analyst. I was handling high-dollar cases now, the ones that required multiple levels of approval. I was working with hospital networks, reviewing complex surgical procedures, evaluating experimental treatments. Graham recruited me personally for his team. He was the director of complex claims, a man in his early 60s who had built his career on finding fraud and stopping abuse of the system. He'd read my analysis of a particularly complicated orthopedic surgery claim and called me into his office. "This report," he said, tapping my work, "is the most thorough review I've seen in years. You didn't just approve the claim. You verified every single code, cross-referenced with medical literature, confirmed the medical necessity through 3 separate channels. Why? Because that's the job." I said. "No," he said. "The job is to approve or deny and move on. What you did was actually care about getting it right." He offered me a position on his team with a significant raise. I accepted. Working for Graham meant handling the most complex, highest-dollar cases in the company. It meant having real influence over outcomes. Over the next year, I learned everything Graham could teach me. How to spot the subtle red flags that indicated potential fraud. How to differentiate between aggressive medical billing and actual abuse. How to apply policies consistently, fairly, without bias. But I also learned about the other side. The cases where legitimate claims were denied because of technicalities, the patients who suffered because someone in an office decided their treatment wasn't medically necessary, the way the system, even when it worked correctly, often worked against the people who needed it most. I thought about my own case, about being wheeled out of the ICU because my parents didn't want to pay, about lying on that couch, struggling to breathe while they celebrated my sister's success. I thought about all the other people who didn't have an Owen to call, who didn't have a Dr. Patel to fight for them. One night, about 2 years into working at Meridian, I was reviewing a case that kept me late at the office. High-dollar inpatient claim, requesting fast-track approval. The patient was a 58-year-old man with a cardiac condition requiring immediate intervention. The claim was flagged for standard review, which would take 72 hours. The patient's wife had called the office that day, desperate, explaining that every hour mattered. Our standard protocol said we couldn't expedite without meeting specific criteria. The case didn't quite meet those criteria on paper. But reading between the lines of the medical reports, I could see that this man's life depended on speed. I approved the expedite. I wrote a detailed justification, documenting my reasoning, making it clear that this was a medical necessity decision based on clinical judgment, not a favor. The surgery happened the next day. The patient survived. Graham called me in 2 days later. I thought I was going to be reprimanded for overstepping. Instead, he closed his office door and said, "That cardiac case, the expedite, I read your justification. It was brilliant. You found a legitimate medical necessity angle that technically met our criteria, even though most people wouldn't have seen it. It was the right thing to do." I said, "It was. But here's what I need you to understand. This job isn't about doing the right thing. It's about doing the legal thing. The defensible thing. Sometimes those align. Sometimes they don't." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you have real power in this role. The power to change outcomes, but power used too often, even for good reasons, becomes a liability. Save it for when it matters most." Understand? I understood. He was telling me to choose my battles. He was also, I realized, telling me that he'd seen enough to know I had my own agenda. He didn't know what it was, but he was experienced enough to recognize purpose when he saw it. That same month, Mason turned 6. We had moved to a better apartment by then, a 2-bedroom, where he could have his own room. I had furniture now. Not much, but enough. I had health insurance through Meridian. Good insurance. I could take Mason to the doctor without feeling like I was bankrupting us. My son had no memory of my family. He had never asked about grandparents. Had accepted my vague explanation that they lived far away and we didn't see them. He had Grace, who babysat sometimes. He had Owen, who had become a real friend. Someone I trusted completely. He had the normal life I had fought so hard to build. I hadn't spoken to my parents in over 2 years. I had no idea how Blair's career was going. Whether my mother's grand plans had panned out. I didn't check their social media. I didn't ask mutual acquaintances about them. I had excised them from my life with surgical precision, but I thought about them. Late at night, when Mason was asleep and the apartment was quiet, I thought about what they had done, about the choice they had made to value money over my life, and I thought about the system that had enabled that choice, the system that let people like them manipulate healthcare for their benefit while people like me nearly died. I kept learning, kept advancing. After 2.5 years at Meridian, Graham called me into his office again. This time, there were other executives there. They were creating a new position, he explained. Senior Specialist for High-Cost Inpatient Claim Approval. It would handle the most complex cases, the ones requiring multiple levels of scrutiny, the ones where there was the highest potential for fraud or abuse. These cases need someone who understands both the medical side and the policy side, the VP of Claims said. Someone who can make difficult decisions fairly. Someone who won't be swayed by pressure from providers or patients or anyone else. Graham recommended you. Can you handle it? I said I could. They offered me the position with a significant raise and greater authority. I would be reviewing cases that could cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. I would have the power to approve or deny, to expedite or delay, to apply policies strictly or with flexibility. I accepted the role with a clear understanding of what I was really accepting. This was the position I had been working toward since the moment I walked into Meridian's office. This was the lever I needed. For the next 6 months, I established my reputation in the new role. Every case got the same thorough review. Every claim was judged by the exact same standards. I approved what met the criteria. I denied what didn't. I requested additional information when needed. I didn't cut corners. I didn't do favors. I became known as tough but fair. Providers complained that I was too strict. Some patients' advocates argued I was heartless. But I never violated policy. I never made a decision I couldn't defend. And gradually, people stopped trying to pressure me because they learned it didn't work. Graham said I had integrity. What he didn't know was that I was waiting. I had built this entire career, climbed this entire ladder, positioned myself in this exact spot, because I knew that eventually, the system would bring my family to me. It took 3 years. 3 years of reviewing thousands of cases, of making difficult decisions, of becoming the person who couldn't be manipulated or persuaded. 3 years of living my life with Mason, watching him grow, building something stable and real. 3 years of becoming someone my family wouldn't recognize. And then, at 2:47 a.m. on a random Tuesday, my phone lit up with a notification. Richard Morrison, age 58. Acute stroke. High-cost inpatient claim. Requesting expedited approval with waiver of standard review protocols due to urgent family circumstances related to professional obligations of family member. I sat there in my bed, reading the file, feeling absolutely nothing. No rage. No vindication. Just a cold, clear understanding that the moment I had been waiting for had arrived. The claim itself was medically legitimate. Richard had suffered a significant stroke at some kind of professional event. The treatment plan was appropriate. He needed immediate care, and his insurance would cover it. But the request to waive standard review protocols, that was different. They were asking for special treatment. They were asking to jump the line, to bypass the safeguards that existed to prevent fraud and abuse. They were asking for exactly the kind of preferential care they had always gotten, the kind of manipulation of the system they had perfected. The justification for the waiver made my jaw clench. Urgent family circumstances related to professional obligations. I clicked through to the notes. Eleanor had specified that they needed expedited approval because they had a major professional event scheduled. A fashion industry gala where Blair was being honored. They couldn't have the distraction of dealing with standard insurance reviews during such an important time. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. They needed fast healthcare approval so they could focus on Blair's career. 3 years ago, they had denied me healthcare so they could focus on Blair's career. The symmetry was breathtaking. I began my review with the same thoroughness I brought to every case. I read through Richard's medical records. The stroke was real. The severity was significant. The recommended treatment was appropriate and necessary. If this had been any other patient, the case would have taken me maybe an hour to review and approve with standard processing timeline, but this wasn't any other patient. This was Richard Morrison. And the rules I followed? The strict, fair, unbiased application of policy meant that I couldn't treat him any differently than I treated anyone else. I started requesting documentation, complete medical history for context, secondary imaging to confirm the diagnosis, detailed treatment plan with justification for each component, letter of medical necessity from the attending physician. All of this was standard protocol for high-cost cases. All of it was required by policy. The responses came back within 24 hours, but they were incomplete, missing some test results. The letter of medical necessity wasn't detailed enough. I sent back requests for additional information, each one perfectly justified by policy, each one extending the review timeline. The phone calls to our general claims line started on day 2. I could see them in the system log. Eleanor Morrison calling repeatedly, asking to speak to whoever was handling her husband's case. The calls were routed through our standard queue, where they joined hundreds of other calls from worried families. On day 3, Blair posted on Instagram about the cruelty and inefficiency of the healthcare system, about how even people with excellent insurance and resources had to fight for basic care. She didn't mention her father by name, but she talked about the stress of watching a loved one suffer while heartless bureaucrats delayed necessary treatment. The post got thousands of sympathetic comments. I saw it because Graham forwarded it to me with a brief note. This about the Morrison case, I confirmed it was. He replied, "Stay the course. Do your job." I was doing my job. I was applying the exact same standard of review I applied to every complex, high-cost case. The problem was that my family had never experienced standard treatment before. They had always gotten special treatment, preferential processing, expedited approvals. Being treated like everyone else felt like discrimination to them. On day 4, their lawyer called our legal department. I saw the email chain. He was threatening legal action for unreasonable delay of medically necessary treatment. Our legal team responded with our standard reply. All cases are reviewed according to consistent protocols. Processing times are within industry standards. The review is ongoing. Graham stopped by my desk that afternoon. "The Morrison case is getting loud," he said. "Their lawyer is making noise. Corporate got a call. They're asking if we're doing anything irregular." "I'm doing exactly what policy requires," I said. "Every request I've made is standard for a case of this size and complexity." "I know. I reviewed your work. It's flawless. But they're not used to standard treatment. They expected special handling." "Everyone expects special handling," I said. "That's not how it works." He studied me for a moment, and I wondered if he saw something in my face, some hint of the truth. But he just nodded. "Keep it clean. Make sure every decision is documented and defensible. If they're going to fight, they won't find an opening." Richard's treatment moved forward because it was medically necessary and covered by his policy. But it moved forward on the standard timeline, with standard reviews, with standard protocols. No expedited approval. No waiver of requirements. Just the rules, applied fairly and equally. The approval came through on day 6. Within normal processing time for complex cases, perfectly reasonable, completely defensible, and absolutely not what they had asked for. The delay meant they missed their gala. Blair had to attend alone, explaining to people that her father had suffered a stroke and the family was dealing with it. The stress of the situation, according to a follow-up Instagram post, had been unnecessarily amplified by a broken healthcare system that treats people like numbers. I read that post and felt nothing. They still didn't understand. I wasn't treating them like numbers. I was treating them like people. Like the same people they had always dismissed as beneath them, as not deserving of the special treatment they took as their right. 2 weeks after Richard was discharged, I got an email forwarded from our general contact address. It was from Eleanor Morrison, sent to the company's public email, trying to reach whoever had handled her husband's case. The email was long, rambling, full of complaints about the review process, about the delays, about the stress. But buried in the middle was a paragraph that made me pause. "We're trying to locate our daughter Harper. We haven't spoken in several years due to a family misunderstanding. We'd like to reconcile, especially now that we've experienced firsthand how difficult the healthcare system can be. If anyone knows how to reach her, please pass along our contact information. A family misunderstanding. That's what they called it. Nearly killing me through negligence and financial calculation was a misunderstanding. I didn't respond to that email. But 3 days later, I got a direct message on LinkedIn from Eleanor. She must have searched the company directory. I must have found my name and photo. The message was carefully worded, apologetic in tone, but not in substance. Harper, I didn't know you were working at Meridian. It's wonderful that you've built a career for yourself. Your father and I have been wanting to reconnect with you and Mason. We've had some time to reflect, and we realized that there were mistakes made on both sides. We'd love to have a conversation about rebuilding our relationship. We're family. After all, please call when you can. Mistakes made on both sides. As if my crime of nearly dying was equivalent to their crime of abandoning me to die. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond with rage, to detail exactly what they had done, to make them face it. But I realized that would be giving them something they didn't deserve my emotional energy. Instead, I replied with one sentence. You didn't fix anything when I was dying. Eleanor's response came within minutes. A wall of text. Justifications about the financial pressure they were under. Explanations about how Blair's career was at a critical point. Rationalizations about how they thought I was being dramatic. How they didn't realize how serious it was. How they were trying to teach me about the value of money and resources. Each excuse was worse than the last. They were trying to make their choice to value Blair's photo shoot over my life sound reasonable. They were trying to turn negligence into a parenting technique. I let it sit for a day. Then replied. You made a choice about what I was worth to you. I'm making the same choice now. More emails followed. My father got involved, taking a different approach. He talked about family obligations, about how I was being selfish, about how we needed to move past old grievances. He talked about Mason, about how he and Eleanor wanted to be grandparents, about how I was depriving their grandson of family. That one almost broke through my calm. The audacity of claiming they wanted to be grandparents when they had shown no interest in Mason for the first 4 years of his life, when they had seen him as a burden and a disappointment. I responded, Mason has everything he needs. What he doesn't need is people who will teach him that his worth is conditional. Blair sent me a DM on Instagram. She was more direct. This is ridiculous. Yes, Mom and Dad made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. You're being vindictive and cruel by refusing to forgive. We're family. Family forgives. I didn't respond to Blair. There was nothing to say. She had stood in our driveway in her silk pajamas and watched them load me into an ambulance, and her only concern had been the noise. She didn't get to lecture me about family now. The emails continued for about 2 weeks. Then, abruptly, they stopped. I later learned from Owen, who still had connections at Mercy General, that my father's recovery was complicated by a secondary infection. He was back in the hospital, facing another extended stay, another round of expensive treatments. I didn't check on his case. It wouldn't have come through my department anyway, different insurance company, but I heard through the grapevine that they were fighting with their insurance provider about coverage, that they were experiencing delays and requests for additional documentation, that they were learning what the system felt like when you didn't have special connections to smooth the way. I felt no satisfaction in this. I felt nothing. That was the strangest part. I had spent years building toward this moment, positioning myself to have power over the people who had hurt me. And when it finally happened, I felt completely neutral. It wasn't revenge. It was just policy, applied fairly, without bias, without special treatment in either direction. They got exactly what they were entitled to under the rules. Nothing more and nothing less. That wasn't cruelty. It was justice. Months passed. I kept working, kept advancing. Graham retired and recommended me as his replacement. At 29 years old, I became Director of Complex Claims Review, overseeing the entire department that handled high-cost, complicated cases. I trained new analysts, built better systems, fought to make sure legitimate claims were approved quickly, while fraudulent ones were caught. Mason thrived. He was 7.5 now, funny and kind. doing well in school. He had friends, hobbies, a stable life. He knew his mother as someone who worked hard, who kept promises, who taught him that you don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. He had no idea about the darkness that had almost swallowed us both. I dated occasionally. Nothing serious. I had friends, people like Owen and Grace, who had proven themselves trustworthy. I had a life that was small but solid, built on real things. Instead of the performance my parents had valued, one day, about 4 months after that initial claim, I saw another file cross my desk. Not Richard this time. Eleanor. Routine procedure. Nothing serious. The claim was straightforward and I approved it within an hour. Standard processing time. Fair treatment. No different from anyone else. That night, I got an email from her. Thank you for approving my procedure. I saw your name on the paperwork. I know you didn't have to do that. I replied I did have to do that. It met the criteria. I don't make decisions based on personal feelings. I know we hurt you. She wrote back, your father and I have had a lot of time to think. The stroke changed things. We see now that we took the wrong approach with you. We want to make amends. I thought about that word. Amends. It implied that something could be repaired, that the relationship could be fixed, but some things, once broken, can't be repaired. They can only be replaced with something new, or left broken. You can't make amends for choosing to let me die. I wrote, you can't apologize your way back from that. You made a decision about what I was worth to you. I'm living with that decision every day. The only difference is that now I'm the one who gets to decide what you're worth to me. And what are we worth? She asked. Nothing. I replied. You're worth nothing to me. Not my anger. Not my forgiveness. Not my time. Not my emotional energy. You're worth exactly what you taught me. I was worth to you. Nothing. That was the last email I sent. I blocked them after that. Changed my phone number again. Made sure my address was still unlisted. I didn't want reconciliation. I didn't want revenge. I wanted exactly what I had, a life they weren't part of. 6 months later, Owen got engaged to a pediatric nurse named Sarah. I was invited to the wedding, asked to be part of the ceremony. At the reception, Owen pulled me aside and said, you know, when I first met you in that ICU, I wasn't sure you were going to make it. Not physically. I knew we could fix that. But emotionally, I thought what they did to you might break something that couldn't be fixed. It did break something, I said. It broke the part of me that believed I needed their approval to have value. Best thing that could have broken then, he said. He was right. The person I was before that night in the ICU. That desperate, diminished version of myself who would accept any crumb of affection, who would sacrifice anything for a hint of belonging. That person had died. The person who survived was harder, colder, but also stronger and freer. A year passed. Mason turned 8. We moved to a better apartment. 1, in a neighborhood with good schools. I was promoted again, became VP of claims at 30 years old. I made good money now, enough to save. Enough to give Mason opportunities I'd never had. I saw my family's names occasionally in the system. Minor claims. Routine procedures. Each time, I treated them exactly like any other case. No special consideration. No malice. Just the rules. Applied fairly. And every time I saw their names, I felt nothing. That was the real victory. Not making them suffer, but becoming genuinely indifferent to their existence. They had become what I had always been to them. An administrative detail. A case to be processed. A line item to be reviewed and closed. Do I wish things had been different, sometimes? Late at night when Mason is asleep and the apartment is quiet. I wonder what it would have been like to have parents who actually loved me. A sister who saw me as something other than an inconvenience. But then I look around at the life I've built, at the strength I've developed, at the person I've become, and I realize that their rejection was the greatest gift they could have given me. It forced me to stop seeking validation from people who were never going to give it, and to find my value within myself. The other day, Mason asked me why we never see Grandma and Grandpa. I thought about lying. about giving him some gentle explanation about distance or busy schedules. Instead, I knelt down and looked him in the eyes and told him the truth, in terms he could understand. Sometimes, I said, people show you who they really are, and when they do, you have to believe them. Your grandparents showed me that they didn't value us the way family should, so I decided we deserved better. He thought about that for a moment, then hugged me tightly. We do deserve better, he said. We have each other. And that, right there, is all the justice I'll ever need. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever had to make yourself into the person who could survive when the people who were supposed to protect you walked away? Have you ever had to choose between the family you were born into and the life you deserved? Drop your story in the comments, because I promise you, you're not alone. And if this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe. Sometimes the best way to heal is to know that someone else walked through the fire and came out the other side. We're all just trying to survive and maybe, if we're lucky, to become the kind of people our younger selves needed. Remember, you don't owe loyalty to people who taught you that your life has a price tag and decided you weren't worth the cost. You deserve better. Always.